Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 42 Rugby Weekly. Bernard Jackman coming up in a few minutes' time. Gavin Casey here to kick things off with Murray Kinsella. Murray, are you all set for our revamp?
Yeah, the brave new dawn. I'm excited. I'm encouraged so far, and I'm excited to see what we can do and push things on to the next level. We've had a great run doing this, and it's been so much fun and plenty more of it ahead, Gav.
Yeah, there certainly is. So in case any listeners have missed our couple of announcements over the last week or so, this Thursday pod will, in a couple of weeks' time, become a members-only pod. The three of us speaking to members every Monday, kind of trying to give the definitive and first word, really, on the weekend's rugby action. Murray and Owen's pod, which has proved so popular on Mondays, will shift to Wednesdays. Maybe a bit of a broader scope for you guys to get into things that people want to hear about as well and not just be tied to some of the weekend action. Murray, I'll bring you back in on that in a second. The two of us then will be doing a Friday preview pod, which will be free for members and non-members alike. It'll be a pretty short, kind of a quick hit look ahead to the weekend's action before we get into like the meat and drink of it the following week for members. And we're excited by the prospect of doing all of this. We're also really encouraged by the number of you who have supported it so far and seem to be on board with it. But as I said in those couple of announcements over the last week or so, we want to actually explain to you in conversational terms, the two of us, why we're doing it. And the why is kind of the central question, I guess, Murray. And like, it is about providing more and better rugby content for our listeners, but like, we're not going to shy away from the fact that there is a commercial element to it as well. To try and encapsulate all of that, I thought it'd be worth giving people a brief sense of who we are, how the 42 actually started, where we're going or where we want to go, and why we believe we're actually worth supporting, because ultimately that is what we're asking people to do. So I don't want to give the entire history of the company, but it did start in 2010. Like, it's pretty young, and people maybe don't realize that. Started off as the Score.ie. The sole purpose at the time, it was before my time, was to cover sport the way we like to read it, the way we like to hear it. And it's probably a testament to our editor, Adrian Russell, our deputy editor, Niall Kelly, to all of the staff that they've taken on over the last 12 years now, that the 42 kind of feels as though it's perceived as being on a par with comparably massive national print publications. I've even felt that acceptance develop since I started in 2017. But the reality is we are actually very different to newspapers, and not just because some of them have had a century head start on us in terms of building readerships, but because we're entirely independent. We're not part of some massive media conglomerate. And without putting too fine a point on it, I kind of see us as a bit of an underdog story, really. Where we're similar to those bigger publications and newspapers is that the 42 generates revenue through advertising. So sponsored partnerships that you might see on the site. That's what's always kept the lights on. It's kept Murray and myself in jobs. But we started the membership a couple of years ago with the intention of becoming self-sufficient, because advertising can be flaky enough, to be honest. And we saw during the pandemic especially, companies actually kind of stopped advertising. It put us in a tight spot. The membership became even more important. Zoom in then on the pod, and I'm sure listeners will know themselves from listening to other podcasts that you either make money on a podcast by putting it behind a paywall on the likes of Patreon, or by doing ad reads during the show. Whereas this move will allow for us to make the podcast commercially viable without having to do ad reads that maybe we're uncomfortable with doing, or that more importantly, you, our listeners, don't want to hear us doing. So after speaking there uninterrupted for longer than will hopefully ever again be the case on this podcast, let me bring you in, Murray, to give your 2 cents on why you're behind this move.
It's been some journey. I joined in 2013, which is a long time ago now. And the company has just like developed so much since. The likes of yourself coming on board, more staff, more coverage, more in-depth pieces, more reads, more podcasts, more of everything really. And it all costs more money, obviously. I suppose the most encouraging thing for me, as you said, since last week we announced this, is to see the number of people who really value our work to the point of stumping up their hard-earned cash to support us continuing to do that. And as you said, this is a really sustainable way of us of us doing it, and probably doing what we do even better. That's the plan for the next while with these pods, putting a bit more time into producing them, making sure they're of the best quality, having a chance to the three of us chat through topics that people, our members, want. And again, that's been a really eye-opening part of the membership for me, is like people who support us driving what we do. You've seen it so much, Gav. Suggestions we get every week and on email or in the WhatsApp groups around what they want covered. And this allows us just closer touch points, I suppose, with the people who engage with our work. So yeah, I'm massively excited by it. And it feels like, yeah, a bit of a big step, but one that has been encouraged so far and one that people seem to be grabbing onto. So yeah, if people have enjoyed the pod, I'd encourage them to stick with us. As you say, it'll be a great touching point on a Monday, straight after the weekend, all the big talking points, get Birch's view, maybe a couple of rants here and there, and our usual analysis. And then with Owen on a Wednesday now, we'll have a bit more scope to, as you say, dig into big talking points, analytical viewpoints, take a broader view as well on the rugby world. That's another bit of eye-opening stuff for me behind the scenes with the members. Like, the members know more about rugby than I do, and they're keen to hear of all different angles around the world, Super Rugby, Irish coaches abroad, that kind of stuff. And we're going to have some guests on. We'll have more time and opportunity to get all that planned and in place and rolling forward. So yeah, I think it's a great offering there with the two rugby pods. Two of us will be chatting to everyone on Fridays as usual and looking forward to the weekends, which we've always enjoyed doing. But there's a hell of a lot else involved in the membership as well, not just rugby. So I can only encourage people to get involved, support us doing our work, and hopefully we'll see a few more sign-ups as well.
Yeah, the long and short of it is that it will allow us to continue doing this. For the last 3 years, I think we've been doing it kind of on top of our day jobs. It takes a few man hours. This will allow it to become probably a little bit more of an integral part of our jobs. The quality will increase as a result of that. The offerings, as you can hear from the two of us, will increase as well in terms of volume, but also in terms of members' ability to actually steer our coverage a little bit and their input. I was interested to hear your origin story with the 42 there, Murray. Are you aware of, well, I mean, you're aware of it, but we have a kind of an origin story that, like, actually, I'm not sure if I've ever told you this. I'm going to say it. We need to get to Birch in a second, but while we're here, right? So about, I think it was like 2016, Sean O'Brien was up for some press junket. He was an ambassador for some brand. I apologize now that I can't remember what it was. I was working for balls.e at the time. Balls had a kind of a smaller team, fewer resources, and you would have almost had to make a case to get out and get to one of these junkets, because if you're just getting the same quotes as are going to be popping up in newspapers or on the 42 as at the time, it may not be worth our while. It was a slightly different model, I guess, or a different way of doing things. So the media person who was running the junket, I contacted her to say, listen, I need a one-on-one interview or else I can't really do it. She said, yeah, that's no problem. We can set that up. So I'm on my way over there, and she rings me and she says, oh, Gavin, you know about the one-on-one interview? I was like, yeah. She was like, I think it might be best actually if we just do it as a group. You know, Murray Kinsella. I was like, I know of him. Like, and she was like, yeah, Murray would kind of prefer if it was just done as a group interview. And I was thinking, who does this guy think he is? You know, and it may have been bullshit, to be fair. But she
Sorry,
may have
that's
just
bad first impression. I don't remember that, Gav. I don't remember what was going on there, and I would always want to one-on-one. I don't know what that was.
But then when we started working together, you were down in New Zealand. So I met with Adrian Russell, our editor. He said, and just before I joined, he kindly offered me a few days or maybe a week or so to kind of, you know, rest up before starting with a new company. But he said preferably I could start straight away because you guys were doing a video show for the Lions tour, and basically I was going to be speaking to you for the very first time on that show, you know what I mean? And I was kind of going, oh, I wonder what this guy's going to be like. Bit of a prima donna from my recollection, and like within seconds I was like, okay, either that woman was lying or I was just entirely wrong. So it's been a fun.
I don't know what the story was there. It's been good. It's been good so far, and that's been the thing as well with this pod. Like, it's definitely been one of the most enjoyable parts of the week, especially last couple of years, and that's been the kind of, like, when people chat to you at matches and say, oh, I read the 42 or whatever, they actually usually say, I listen to the pod, I enjoy the pod. And it's been class to see that kind of grow for it out there and a bit of acceptance. And it'll be great to have a few of those people along for the kind of new chapter with us as well. So yeah, it's been a lovely part of the working week chatting to you two lads, nattering away as if we're sitting on a few bar stools, and long may it continue.
100%. That's enough about us. Let's chat to Birch. Bernard Jackman, great to see you. We have to start on a damp note, however. Just before we came on to start recording, the death was reported of a real legend, Vainga Tuingamala, and wanted to take a couple of minutes to pay him his dues. I think for rugby fans of a certain vintage, he was such an enjoyable player to watch and actually a kind of a significant presence. Talk to us about your memories of him.
Yeah, Inga the winger. He was obviously a legend across code. I actually met him a good few times when I was playing for Sale Sharks, because I played with a guy called Apollo Perlini and Jason Robinson, so two rugby league guys who came to join Sale Sharks. And Inga obviously was a big mentor to Jason Robinson, and helped him get over some some issues with drink and things like that. And he used to come down to the club, and he was a huge man. I mean, him and Lomu for me were the two biggest, most powerful wingers I ever remember. And but was just a kind, gentle giant off the field. And yeah, obviously, it's terrible. But Steve Black, the fitness coach for Newcastle Falcons, who Inga played for, also passed away this week, and they were very close. So yeah, it's very sad for all his family and friends.
Yeah, Murray, we're old enough to remember him, obviously, but when you think of when Bernard compares him to Lomu there, back then those guys were a dime a dozen, actually even rarer than that. For somebody to be as powerful as Ingo was, it was just a sight to behold. And in this day and age, nearly every player is an absolute animal. So maybe that's what stands out a little bit, was just the absolute power of him and how different, unique that felt at the time. Yeah,
he was a game changer and probably laid the way for John Lomu to kind of follow through. And even I just spent the last 10 minutes before we jumped on YouTube watching some of the clips. I highly recommend doing it, because it just was different back then. No one was like Inga the winger and blasting through and around and hammering people in the tackle. He's a giant amongst men in all those videos. So has left an amazing legacy in the game. Really sad news, and rest in peace.
Absolutely. We are going to look ahead to Ireland, Italy on the show today. We have got loads of chat coming up. We're kind of putting together a running order. We felt like it was an opportunity to have a bit of fun this week, talk about different things. There's some news that was reported by the Telegraph during the week that the A teams of Premiership clubs in England may be set to join the Championship. We're going to get into that and maybe apply it to, or give it a kind of an Irish context and ask if it could be done with provincial A teams in the AIL, for example. We're going to look at some of the comings and goings, I was going to say, at the provinces. Really just a couple of interesting signings. Loads. We'll get into it. But I wanted to start, Birch, with the story that you tweeted out earlier in the week. Scott Robertson. Was it Scott Robertson? Or am I? No, sorry. Smith. Excuse me. Wade Smith. Excuse me. Yeah. Wayne Smith giving some memories of Roy Keane speaking to the All Blacks 2008 in Wellington ahead of a test against Ireland. Just to give people a sense of what he was saying, he said, I'll tell you a story that made a real difference to me. He was basically answering whether or not he would ever coach a team like England, who he was linked with. And he says, Roy Keane came into the All Black environment for about a week in the build-up to a test match down in Wellington. He was an intriguing guy. We asked him if he would get up and talk to the boys at dinner. So he stood up and he said something really interesting. He talked about going from Man U to Celtic. It seems like it was a bit of a fingers to Fergie. He said as soon as he pulled on the new jersey over his head, he realised it was the wrong jersey. It made a real impression on me. I kept thinking about that. If I pulled the white jersey over my head, would it be the right fit for me? And I decided at that point that I probably wouldn't coach against the All Blacks. It's not set in concrete, but that's how I felt. It would have been the wrong jersey to pull over the head. And part of the reason why we bring it up, aside from it just being objectively interesting, I think, is the fact that you were there in 2008. You actually met Roy on that tour.
Yeah, so he was obviously in the All Blacks camp, but obviously he's an Irishman and an Irish rugby fan, and he used to go to Munster games. I remember seeing him in crowds at Munster games when Munster were on their European Cup odysseys, and I bumped into him one day in a coffee shop and just introduced myself, and he said, look, he was loving it. He'd always admired the All Blacks. He was doing his pro coaching license, and part of that is you have to spend time with a different team and ideally different sports. So he obviously proposed. I'm sure lots of soccer coaches would love to spend a week with the All Blacks, but they mightn't have the connections. So I think it was through Adidas, even though he was a Diodora man, from what I remember, but he was able to get access to them. And I didn't know he'd spoken to them, to be honest, but I know that Rog, Quinny and someone else went out for dinner with him, and they said
O'Connell.
Paul O'Connell. Yeah, they said, I remember them telling everyone was all ears about what it was about, and he said it was fascinating. You know what I mean? And look, he's a fascinating man and character. But it was amazing. So Wayne Smith, to be honest, Scott Robertson, who you mentioned, is obviously top of the list for most coaching jobs at the moment. But Wayne Smith could have any job in the world that he wants. He consults in Japan a little bit in Kobe, and they won the championship, the Japanese league the year before this last. But he doesn't want to take on anything that's not going to fit into his family situation, and he doesn't want to take on a job to coach against the All Blacks. And he credits Roy Keane for kind of planting that seed in his mind. And it's amazing, actually. So I know a lot of coaches who've got coaching jobs because Wayne Smith recommended him. That's how much weight and credibility he has in the game. And he's phenomenal. He came and spoke to one of our coaching groups and gave up an hour. He's just, to be honest, he's probably the brightest. Joe Schmidt's obviously brilliant, a brilliant rugby mind, but I think Wayne Smith would be up there, I think, in terms of seeing how the game is going to go, and has had a big role in the All Blacks, 2 World Cup wins.
Keane actually spoke about that dinner with Rog, Quinny and Paul O'Connell in an interview he did recently with David Walsh in the Times. I just have a little snippet of it here. He says, so Ronan is there, referring to Rog, obviously. He wants to know about the All Blacks. How are you getting on with them, Roy? Brilliant, Keane says. They're good lads. You're in for a tough game. And Rog goes, can I ask you something? Go on. Have they mentioned me? Keane says, I swear he hasn't had his main course yet. Do I lie? And then Keane says, to be honest, Ronan, they mentioned you at Monday morning at 9 o'clock. And Rog says, I fucking knew it. They're fucking always going after me. But he helped you out a little bit, Birch, as well, did he?
Well, it was a connection. So I was doing when I retired, I went back and did a master's in UCD, and I did my thesis on the correlation between high performance behaviour in sport and business. And it was funny, actually, because I played for Sale back in 2000 and 2001. And basically the groundsman for Sale was an Irishman, and the groundsman in Old Trafford was an Irishman, and they like to have a beer on a Sunday. And sometimes Roy used to go to that, and so between the jigs and the reels, anyway, he was helped me get into United for a few days. They were one of the clubs that I visited as part of my thesis, but it was phenomenal. But look at these. I'm a United fan, so even to probably a bit starstruck to meet him in a coffee shop, and he's just he's box office.
He certainly
Eddie
is.
Jones said he was up there as the very best speaker they had in English camp. Players, coaches loved him. Although Johnny Sexton said they got him in before the England game last year, and obviously that didn't go so well. So I think Johnny might hold that against him.
Look at it. Getting a speaker in doesn't mean you're going to win, but I think what he has is he's able to catch people's interest. You know what I mean? He's just a fascinating communicator, I think, and obviously his stature in the game. So if, like likes of Eddie's getting them in, and players are raving about him, because those players will have heard, the best speakers, or the most high profile speakers around. I mean, it must be hard for Mick Carney, who organises the Irish, the guest speakers for the Irish squad, to try and get somebody who's going to come in and blow them away. I think they had, they've had Marvin Hagler, and they've had, DJ Carey, Henry Shefflin, the best of Irish and international sports stars and non-sports stars. But to get someone like Keane who can, get a room of rugby players who maybe aren't massive soccer fans to be engaged is credit to him.
Who's the most interesting person you've met in that type of capacity, Birch? Whether it was speaking to you when you were a player as part of a squad, or maybe even somebody you brought in yourself.
Yeah, the best guy I've been involved was Padraig Harrington when he came into the Irish squad. down in Enfield. So there's lots of talk about the reason Ireland won the Grand Slam in 2009 was the kind of argument between Rob Kearney and the Munster players about, does playing for Ireland mean as much to them as playing for Munster? But I actually didn't feel that was that big a deal, to be honest. I thought Harrington coming in that weekend and talking about, how he'd been the nearly man, how he tries not to read newspapers, but he invariably saw Harrington chokes again. He'd been second 22 or 23 times in big tournaments, and a little bit around how his mindset was. Just to give you something that struck home with me was he used to be fascinated with Tiger Woods, right? And he had a video guy or his coach, and he'd always say, he'd see Tiger Woods hit a brilliant shot, and he'd say, clip that shot for me and put it as part of a video package, right? So effectively, he when he looked at Tiger Woods, he only saw the brilliance he had, right? And he said the problem was then he was reinforcing in his mind that Tiger Woods was unbeatable. So invariably, if he was going into play, if he's in the last group of Tiger Woods on the last day of a competition, he kind of put massive pressure on himself because, and I'm not massively into golf, so I could have this wrong, but say for example, he kind of built up the Tiger Woods that hit 67, right, or whatever on a Sunday. And to beat Tiger Woods, he'd have to hit 65, so he'd force everything, right? And Tiger Woods wouldn't have to hit 67 because Padraig could hit 72, Tiger Woods could hit 73, and effectively he flipped the whole thing round. And instead of actually picking highlight videos of Tiger Woods, whenever he saw him hit a bad shot, he said, "Look clip that for me," right? So the idea would be that look for people's weaknesses. Don't build up the England or France to be unbeatable. They've got flaws as well, and that little change in mindset, along everything else he did, helped him. I think at that stage he'd won 2 majors. Maybe he'd only won his first one, but he's obviously won 3 now. And he was just very open. And obviously a guy like that coming in, who's an Irish person who'd had failure, but had conquered the world as such. And he spoke brilliantly, so he's probably the best I've had.
I wonder, are Italy compiling a few clips of Ireland's weaknesses during the week, Murray? I'm not sure, did you find anything especially interesting from press stuff during the week before we get into the game? Because it can often be a difficult game to talk about, really. You wind up talking about potential experimentation in a lineup or lack thereof, probably. And we have spoken about Italy very recently on the podcast. We would love for them to remain in the Six Nations. It looks like they will. But apart from the fact that they're bringing through some really exciting young players, it's difficult to speak about this game as a contest.
Yeah, it can be a hard sell in that sense, and it very much is about Ireland themselves. And even though they are at pains to avoid that being the case and showing respect, you absolutely know that's the story here this weekend. They're trying to get as big a scoreline as they possibly can, keep themselves right in that mix for the title. And absolutely, you'd love to see Italy provide quality and provide a contest, but on what we've seen so far, that is probably not going to be the case. And anything but a big Ireland win would be a bit of a surprise. So yeah, absolutely, it's about Ireland, who they pick. There's loads of chat about that as always. The number 10 jersey is off mentioned and is again this week, so it's a big one.
We're straight in at number 10 here, Birch, with a question from David Cordial. He says it's a question that's been rattling around the members group chat as well on WhatsApp. Is it better for Jack Carty to play 30 minutes on Sunday or Johnny Sexton? Does someone of Sexton's calibre still need warm-up games before a big test in Twickenham? And is it a problem if Ireland don't have a clear idea who their third choice 10 is?
I actually would be in favour of giving Joey and Jack Carty game time this weekend. And I think Johnny would be capable of starting against England. Don't forget, England's 2 weeks away. So he'll have 2 weeks or whatever they do next week. They might have a mini camp, but he can run the team as such. So I don't think there's any need to risk him. I think it'd be very good for Jack Carty to get longer off the bench. The reality is, we need 3 10s, and I think it's important that Jack Carty gets that vote of confidence from the coaches. That's always important for a player. He knows he's not number 1. He probably knows he's not number 2, but he certainly would benefit from having his form for Connacht rewarded. And even last week when he went back to play for Connacht against the Scarlets, I thought he had a big impact on the game. So yeah, I would be in favour of that. And I don't think Johnny needs 20 minutes this week. I said if the England game was 7 days later, you could potentially argue it, but I think he's going to have a massive role to play against England and Scotland, and why risk it for 20 minutes when you could be but you could be giving someone else valuable game time.
How would Johnny see it, Birch? Is it a cliche to say he just wants to play every minute, or would he actually be able to accept there is a bigger picture?
Yeah, look, I think for this game he would accept it. I mean, I know if you look at what Leinster have done a few times in Pro 14 finals, starting Ross ahead of him. He obviously wants to play every big game, but I think as captain of Ireland, and he would put the team first, and I think he would understand it.
Nonetheless, Murray, it would appear as though he's going to start, right?
He did the captain's media yesterday, which usually is an indication, all right, of them captaining the starting team at the weekend. When James Ryan's been captain, he's done that presser, and when Johnny's been fit and available to start, he's done that presser as well. So he's kind of set the tone and underlined that they're still going after a title and a triple crown. And I mean, none of us would be shocked if he is at number 10 in that starting team. You think of this time last year, and the exact same happened, didn't it? He missed the France game. Billy Byrne started, and Ross Byrne came off the bench, and then Johnny was back for the Italy game to get some momentum back into their campaign. And we all talk about the World Cup, and of course they have as well, and they've been more open about that definitely in this cycle and looking forward. But they are still, as I said, looking for silverware in this championship. And if Johnny Sexton gives them the best chance of racking up as big a scoreline as possible, then that's probably how they're viewing this weekend. And also getting some momentum back into the team after the first setback in a while in Paris, where things didn't go exactly as they wanted. They definitely learned a bit about their own approach, and it's been fascinating to hear Farrell and Sexton both talk about ignoring the chat around physicality and instead focusing on the little things that they can do better to strike when they actually get those moments of momentum, and back what they've been doing in attack in particular over the last number of months. So yeah, I absolutely personally see the longer term picture. I would pick Joey Carberry to start this weekend and build on what he did in Paris and get another bit of time in the saddle directing the team. But you know, all along it wouldn't have been a shock if Sexton starts and straight back in the team to lead it all.
What are you looking for, Birch, from Ireland this weekend?
I'd like to see some new faces, to be honest. I think Ireland's attack is very much on a positive trajectory, and I think now, because everybody knows their roles and the different options, I think it's easier for Joey or Jack Carty to play 10. I thought before we were very reliant on Sexton and his ability to boss people around and organise people. So I think it's easier now, and we saw a glimpse of that in Paris. Even though we were, obviously beaten on the gain line, we still managed to find space, which was great. I'd love to see James Lowe play. I'd love to see Ballottloon play, and that's not a reflection on Hansen or Conway at all. I think they're both really good options. It's just I think we need to build more depth. I think Lowe could be really important for Ireland against England, Scotland, and again, that's nothing against Mac, but I just think we need a left-footed kicker, particularly with Gibson Park, kicking game not being his main strength. A lot of focus goes on 10 then, and I think having a left-footer is very important, and I think that Farrell will see that as well. So whether he starts or comes on this weekend, I would imagine they'll be gearing him up for later. And again, don't forget how important he was for Ireland in November, so I think he is. I think he'd come in. I'd like to see him come in. I'd like to see Ballottloon come in as well. I think we need to find players who can have moments of brilliance and unlock a defence from long range. And the way we're trying to play as well, I mean, having a winger who can go 50 metres and exploit an edge, I think is important. And I'm not saying that he's a finished article, but I think he could be someone really important for us in the World Cup. So they'd be the two for me. And then look at whether you want to, obviously Dan Sheehan will probably start, whether you want to start Beelum or Cian Healy and bring the other lads off the bench. I'm not really fussed about that, to be honest, but the guys I'd like to see would be Joey, Jack, Robert, Ballottloon and James Lowe.
You mentioned Gibson Park and Cian Healy, both of them signing new Leinster deals during the week, as well as back Abdeladze. Healy moves off a central contract, Porter moves up to one Murray, and a bit of a strange situation for Gibson Park as well, in the sense that he's absolutely integral to everything everything that the national team does at the moment. But obviously, they're not going to give central contracts to two players in the exact same position. Conor Murray has one, so Gibson Park kind of has to wait his turn, I guess. Nonetheless, right, just good for Leinster to nail these guys down. Great to see Healy giving it another 2 years. But yeah, talk to us about, say, I don't know, the Gibson Park dynamic. Like, is it just a case of having to be kind of patient there, or has he a right to feel a little bit aggrieved?
That's me, Gav.
Sorry, yeah.
Yeah, it's a really interesting dynamic in Irish rugby, and always has been. The central contracts. Someone like Peter O'Mahony isn't in the starting team with Ireland and is on a central deal. Josh van der Flier obviously re-signed a Leinster contract and is not on a central. So it definitely creates a lot of debate and interest among supporters. And sometimes you do question that system and its value and the status, I suppose, it endows on players when they have that central deal. You saw how honoured Tyke Byrne was to get his central contract, and what a well-earned one it is, and a very different, unique journey. I suppose the thing is, the RFU probably assess it individually, and also we have to remember many of these deals will have been done quite a few months ago even. So they're not just recent, not decided last week. But I mean, Gibson Park was the first choice scrum half in November. And as we discussed at the time, that was his first campaign probably as the starter, whereas Conor Murray had an incredible body of work behind him, probably would have attracted interest from abroad and did, as far as we know, and also would have gone back onto Munster's budget if he was off a central deal. So all those factors are definitely considered, as well as him still being an important part of the Ireland squad. Whether Gibson Park feels aggrieved about it, I don't know. Honestly, I would imagine that he had anticipated another Leinster deal at this stage when he looked at it longer term. Van der Flier is probably the one where I was more like, oh, wow, that's really interesting. A guy who's a pretty much nailed on first choice for Ireland, as far as I can see, in that 7 jersey without like really direct competition at the moment. Obviously, the back row is always ferociously competitive, but he's been really consistent over a long period of time and continues to get better. So he was probably the one I felt was more maybe hard done by, and that's probably not the right expression. The Porter one going to Loosehead and taking that Cian Healy central contract makes complete sense, because that's the trajectory of his career, and it's exciting to see him get better and better. And I think it is brilliant that Cian Healy is playing on for another 2 years, still has lots to offer, both for Leinster and indeed with Ireland. So yeah, congrats to them, I suppose, all on their new deals. But I'd love to hear Birch's thoughts on how the central contracting system is kind of working now, and whether it's fit for purpose at the moment.
Look, I think a central contract system is obviously important, and it's probably at the it's the backbone of how we operate and how I'd say we will continue to operate. It's just, I think it's probably more. I presume there's no reason to suspect that, for example, a central contract that's for a player who's not really first choice anymore, if they decide to keep him on that central contract, that's the same value. That contract can drop. I'm not sure. I'm not privy to whether you could actually earn more on a provincial contract than a central contract. And obviously the logic would be there should be a natural progression. But for a guy coming off one, for a guy who's been in a long-standing one, there's no reason why every time they negotiate it, it's not on current market value to a certain extent. But what the difference is it affects the province's budgets. All right. So, for example, from Munster point of view, having Peter O'Mahony and Conor Murray on a central contract is a help to them in terms of being able to support them in terms of managing their squad spend. Likewise, Porter going on to a central contract in place of Healy. It's a direct swap, really, so it's not going to save Leinster any money, but they don't lose out on it. You know what I mean? And the beauty is to try and get as many players as you can on central contracts, because that helps you manage your spend elsewhere. But as I said, I would like to hope that those guys who signed, Josh van der Flier, Gibson Park, who signed the provincial contracts, you can be pretty sure they're getting paid very close to market value, and probably they don't care how it comes to them. You know what I mean? In their wage slip, in theory, there's more security for having a central contract, in that there may be more pressure on the coaches to give you game time, etc. But the reality is, I think once the salary is what you want, It shouldn't really matter, but it definitely matters to the director of rugbies or the CEOs, because that affects how much they have to spend on others.
That was actually a question posed to us by Graham Glendenning via email. He hilariously spelled your name Birch as Bert, Beirt, as in the Irish for two people, which shows you the esteem in which he holds it. But yeah, he was actually asking that same thing, I suppose, whether or not a player being on a central contract gives the coach an impetus to actually select them at international levels. So even in the case of, say, Peter O'Mahony, who some people would argue just tactically probably wouldn't warrant a place on Ireland's bench at the moment. I'm not saying it's my opinion. Like, is there a kind of an incentive just because they're centrally contracted to select them? You're saying no.
No, look, there isn't really, except you would like to believe or hope that the head coach, i.e. Andy Farrell, would be involved in those discussions, so when that decision has been made, whether, I'm not sure who obviously if Noosa 4 is involved in it, but I'm not sure how many people are involved in it. It's you would imagine that he's making the case saying, yeah, look, at player X is massively important to me as we go into the next World Cup cycle or for this Six Nations, and I fully support that player being on a central contract. And obviously he can change his mind on that, but we know that humans try and double down on their decisions, so it may influence it. The other question I saw on the WhatsApp group was aligned to this, was, does it mean more time off? Does it mean less game time? The reality is, I think the relationship is so strong, and the RFU pay for everything anyway, that no, it doesn't. I mean, Gibson Park, if he needs a rest, we'll get a rest, so, and from that point of view, the player welfare thing, I don't think it matters. I think all players in Ireland the individual gets put at the forefront of any discussion, and it doesn't affect you. Whereas that was the big thing in France and Wales, is that the national union can control a lot more what those central contracted players do. I think in Ireland that happens anyway, because we just have such a good system and it's so aligned, is that it happens. So yeah, it really is only a name, and it affects the CEO, as you said, more than it does the player.
And really, I suppose, as you said, Birch, at the end of the day, it is kind of all from the same pot. Like, the money in Irish rugby comes from the men's senior international team, and that goes right through the game. And again, even player welfare, it's all from the same pot, really. Like, that is one of the strengths of the Irish system, is how incredibly joined up and connected it is, and that is, I suppose, to the envy of other rugby playing nations. So there's good in it.
Yeah, and I think it's pretty transparent as well. And I'll use the example of Simon Zebo coming back. I mean, no one really needed to know that was a dual contract. That was a once-off split between the RFU and Munster, which we were told it was. And again, I admire the fact that they were creative and they did what they had to do to bring the player back and to help Munster and maybe help Ireland. And I'm sure it could cause ruffles amongst Connacht, Leinster and Ulster, because they hadn't access to that type of a deal. But I think that's pretty transparent by the RFU and Munster on that, and we don't need to be privy to the players' salaries. I mean, but I think it is good to have kind of clarity around what players are centrally contracted, and as I said, if there's something a little bit unusual like that deal, it's good to be made aware of it.
Murray, a quick
just
word.
from a nosiness point of view, not for help us in any other way.
Murray, while we're talking about Ireland-Italy, right? Quick word on the under-20s. Again, a bit of a different dynamic to this one, because it's a more real as a contest. Italy have a victory over England under their belt already in this competition. They're still just about in contention. Ireland obviously top of the table after a sensational win in France. A few changes to the back line. How do you see this one going, and who have you got your eye on this weekend? Tomorrow night even.
Yeah, the form lines tell us this is an unbelievably tough game for Ireland. They got beaten by Italy, pre-Christmas in a kind of warm-up for this competition, and Italy's results have been leading towards that 6-0 win over England last time out, their first ever against them at this level, and a brilliant indicator of the excellent work that Steve Aboud has been doing and helping in that system in Italy. So absolutely looks like their toughest challenge yet, which is a really strange thing to say about a clash with Italy. Ireland have been really gritty and resilient. I think Willie Falloon was talking about it this week. So far in this competition, they weren't fancied as a vintage crop of 20s by any means with star names. It wasn't really like that. Looking forward to the competition, but they've impressed everyone so far. Interesting to see the changes. Looking forward to seeing more of Jude Postlethwaite, who comes into the midfield. He's a really exciting back from Ulster. He's played for Ireland Sevens. He's got a really good frame and stature and skill set. Looks like a really rounded player. So nice for him to have that kind of injection of energy into what is otherwise a pretty settled squad. I mean, the pack is unchanged again, and they've been so impressive. Ruben Crother's leading the way with just abrasive, aggressive, and quite confident performances. There's a maturity to this side as well, which isn't always the case at this level of rugby. It can be often frantic and a bit naive in how they go about it. But yeah, really excited to see them back in action. And it's class that Italy are the strongest competition at this point.
It kind of felt like last year, Bernard, because Alex Candelan was so dominant. He was the name on everybody's lips from that 20s crop. And this one, it feels as though the excitement is more evenly spread across the entire squad. It feels like there are just kind of names popping up that almost all of them are worth following, watching, and observing their progress. Who sticks out to your mind?
Yeah, look, I think just going back on last year's team, I thought there was 3 outstanding players, Soroka, Doak and Candelan, and I don't think it was a great group, so they really stood out. I think, as you said, the quality is probably more balanced. I like Jack Boyle. I've seen him since he was a schoolboy. Very dynamic ball carrier. I thought, Charlie Tecker, is it the out half, looks really decent. And obviously the guys that Murray's mentioned. Yeah, I think this is going to be a really good test for them. And they've obviously had a walkover against Wales, got into a very tough game and did brilliantly to win in France. And there's a bit of pressure on them now, a bit of expectation. So it'll be fascinating to see how they handle it, this Italian team who there's such hope about.
Report in the Telegraph during the week, as I mentioned at the top of the show, that the A teams from England's Premiership clubs could compete in the Championship. There is a lot of opposition to this, Murray, from Championship clubs who believe their competition could be reduced to a kind of a glorified reserves league. It feels as though the RFU may push ahead with it. I think there's a decision set to be made tomorrow. I'm not sure will that be the actual concrete decision, but certainly a development on that front. What's your impression of that whole situation to begin with? And then we can maybe open it up into an Irish context.
Yeah, it seems quite messy, and it seems like the Championship clubs have not been central to the process over there, which is just interesting. It's really clear that the Premiership clubs have big concerns and issues with a lot of their younger players essentially just not playing any rugby. And obviously the pandemic accentuated that. Some young guys went long spells without actually playing the sport that they're being probably underpaid actually, but kind of employed to play. And that's an issue for the provinces as well, which is why we kind of started chatting about it in our WhatsApp group, is the larger squads, particularly now with 3 fewer games in the URC as well. And it's clear that the AIL is a brilliant ground for players to play. We've seen more of it this season, which has been really encouraging, but we kind of got to the point where we're thinking, imagine you had Munster A against young Munster, the Cookies, on a weekend where there's not a Champions Cup game or whatever it might be, or even on the same weekend, to get more guys game time. It would be an unbelievable battle, rivalry. There'd be a nice edge to it. And you're probably looking for an ideal home for the provincial A sides, because they do exist. They have existed. They've caused a lot of strife to AIL clubs by taking players away. It's clear that the provinces believe that it's a really important stepping stone. Even in Leinster, you look back at the team that won the Celtic Cup, I was looking at today with Dan Sheehan and the number of players that were on that team who are now excelling with Leinster. The province believed that was a really valuable part of their development, playing together in the same systems that the senior team use, with same calls and similar coaching faces as well. So there's a grey area, I think, not just in Ireland and England clearly as well, that needs to be resolved and maybe channeled in the right direction. So kind of just got us thinking a little bit about what could happen over here.
Yeah, I'm not sure. whether it's a good or bad thing to do. In some ways, I think that I think it's been brilliant to see those young players go back to the clubs this year, which has been brilliant. There would have been more of it, except for obviously that COVID outbreak at Christmas, which is forcing the provinces to play games now, which they weren't originally going to play. So I think it could have been an unbelievable year for rebuilding, and it has been a very good year, but it could have been even stronger. And it's no one's fault the way it's unfolded. But also, having said that, I know that when I used to go back to play for Clontarf, or other pros went back, you're displacing somebody who basically that's their rugby, So to give someone game time takes away game time from someone else, and sometimes there's pressure on coaches to play those professional or academy players over the club player who is very committed, just maybe hasn't had the opportunity to get into a professional environment. So I think I think to have, if the clubs knew that they weren't going to get those players back, they would love the challenge, I would imagine, of playing in a league or some kind of a competition against them. And I think it would invigorate those players who, have ambitions to be professional players or don't, but want to test themselves against a team of would-be pros or a mix. I think they'd relish it, to be honest. But I know it's very difficult, and then the flip side of it is, the benefit or the feeling and pride clubs have having had an international play for them. So Tyke Furlong played some rugby in Clontarf. All those internationals have a connection with a club, and not just the club players in that club who played with them for a period of time and enjoyed having played with a future international. So it's a very difficult one to work out. Certainly, if it was to happen, it would have to happen with a lot of engagement and thought behind it. Whereas what seems to be happening in England is to find out about it, secondhand, and that's not good, because I know what Ealing are trying to build. I'm actually just looking at the English Championship here. Doncaster are actually top. Everyone presumes Ealing are going to go up. Now Ealing have 2 games in hand, but they're only a point ahead of Cornish Pirates, who've played the same amount of games. So, Jersey are making big strides, and I think it'll be a little bit different over there because they're obviously professional entities in themselves, and they'd be competing with, I suppose, teams with bigger budgets, etc. Whereas I think here the amateur clubs would love a crack off a development team from the provinces. That's my own gut feeling on it, but it's not clearly, yes, that's a good thing or it's a bad thing. I think it's something that would have to be debated long and hard.
Yeah, we're spitballing, but I guess sorry, Murray, come in there. Yeah, the other
bit that I read about in terms of that Telegraph report is that they see it as a kind of commercial thing as well, where they can better sell maybe the championship with all these superstar hotshot young players playing in the competition, and you get to see a sign of the future. But I really do wonder what the market for that is. And I see people, they mention to me, like, why is there not a URC A League where the same teams who are playing URC have their eight teams playing against each other every second weekend or whatever it might be, and you get great crowds to that and people will watch that. But I don't know if they really would. I'm trying to think of other examples in other sports. Maybe in football, like, does anyone watch the reserve leagues or the under-23 leagues? Is there a big market for that? Not that I'm aware of. Maybe I'm completely ignorant of it, but there's only a certain amount that you can sell in a sport, and it's got to be a really top-class product if you're going to try and make money out of it.
Yeah, 100%. I think quite often people who make that case are just people who are diehards, but like really emotionally invested in the development of players. Like proper rugby fans who like to see a conveyor belt of talent coming through, who have an eye on every player at their province or at their club, and every young player at every other club. But like those people are actually pretty rare, and probably rarer than they themselves realize. And a casual observer of sport, or even a casual rugby fan, I would say, isn't necessarily going to attend too many A games or watch it on TV if it's on. But yeah, the England thing will, the situation in England will rumble on, I'm sure. Sorry, were you going to say something there, Murray?
Yeah, I'd watch a gaff if there was an A League. I'm one of those people, but I'm not a good. If you're doing a market study, I'm not a good person to ask.
just a quick word along similar lines. Bernard, Georgia and Zimbabwe and Kenya are going to participate in the second tier of the Curry Cup. Now, the Georgian situation is such that because so many of their frontliners play in France, they will be unable to play those players. They won't be released for it. So it's going to be a lot of domestic players from Georgia, which feels on the face of it like a really good opportunity for some of their more second string or peripheral players to be introduced to that international environment. The long and short of it is that these three countries believe it'll help their development in their bids to reach the next World Cup. Feels like olive branch is the wrong term, but like a nice hand up from South Africa Rugby. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think it is, and I think it's great to see. We're always trying to find out how we can help those tier 2 countries, bridge the gap, get to the next level, and I think this is a positive initiative, and in both in terms of getting a chance to travel, but also play against different and decent opposition. And I think it's good it's without their frontliners, to be honest, because that's what they need to do. They need to build more depth and open up opportunities for some of those guys who are playing club rugby in Georgia to get the spotlight on them, to potentially get professional contracts and grow the depth chart. So yeah, I think it's a really positive in a week where probably there's a lot of talk about how we chop Italy and make the Six Nations better. It's actually good to see something happen that's a positive for tier 2.
Certainly is. On to one of your exclusives on our members Zoom event with Squidge from a couple of weeks ago. You had a little line at the end, Bert. You told all of the members on the call that Frank Bradshaw Ryan would be joining Ulster. It was confirmed, 2-3 weeks later. 26-year-old lock playing for Nevers in French Pro D2. What would be the difference between his developing in the second tier in France over 6 years versus a prospect emerging in Ireland and operating at one of the provinces for that period of time? Or will there be much of a difference? It's just an interesting career path.
It's an interesting one. I think what you're getting is someone who's had to fight for his career in a very tough environment. Had to leave Ireland quite young. Maybe wasn't rated here or didn't see. I'm not sure how it ended, but obviously there was a decision made that he was going to move on, and he's like Pro D2 is very tough. Very, very tough physically. By all accounts, he's really kind of grown into himself and has become physically stronger, which is important. There's some good matches in that league. It's certainly for front five forward. It's a real test, and I know Nevers were sorry to lose him. I think he had a year left in his contract, but they understood that he wanted an opportunity to play at a higher level and get back to Ireland, having been away, I think 6 years or 7 years. And I think it's brilliant. I think there's another Munster lock, John Madigan, is it, down there in Pro D2 as well. And yeah, they're getting great life experience. They're making a living. But I suppose, the opportunity to come home and try and prove themselves at a URC level or Champions Cup level or Challenge Cup level is a big draw, and I'm really fascinated to see how he goes. And he could be another Tyke Byrne type story where there's been a little bit of adversity and he's found a way to get back and get maybe higher than some of the players who were his alumni in the academy.
Have you seen much of him, Murray? Have you seen footage of him play, clips of him? Or have you watched games? You've probably seen them all.
Yeah, I've seen a couple of games. It's tricky enough finding Nevers games, to be honest, but I have watched a few of them in action, and a really good, gritty, abrasive set-piece lock. Came out of Shannon, obviously, and was in the Munster sub-academy and didn't make it there. And that's why I love this story. He's coming back to Ulster and he wants this badly. Every training session, you're going to get him trying to take people down who are perceived to be above him in the pecking order. He had just signed a new 2-year deal, was it, Birch? I think in Nevers.
Yeah.
Relatively recently, and obviously Ulster thing pops up, and he, the club is understanding of him going back and chasing that dream, because obviously he wants to push on and play in Ireland. And he's got, you ask, what has he had that's different? He's had experience of being in a battle every single weekend. It's a slog. He scored 4 tries. He got 6 yellow cards during his time in Nevers, which maybe is an indication of getting stuck in and playing on the edge of the law at times and just being grizzled. You know, he's still a relatively young mid-20s lock, but he has been in some really tough conditions and hostile environments, and he's had to fight for everything. And I'm sure it hasn't been easy over there at times. Like initially when you go over there, you're taking a bit of punt. You're probably not getting paid that well. And yeah, deadly life experiences, but it gives you a different kind of resilience. He's on a 1-year contract in Ulster with every point to prove. So I can't wait to see how it goes for him.
Speaking of life experience then, Birch, Munster recruiting a young lad by the name of Chris Moore. He was playing his ball in Exeter University and he came through the Beach and Cliff School in Bath, which has strong ties to Bath Rugby. He has played for Ireland under 18s clubs in, 2018, as far as I'm aware. I don't know, have you heard of him before, or do you have any insight as to how the move actually came about? Because it's an interesting one and a brilliant opportunity for a slightly younger man to get a sense of this professional environment.
Yeah, look, I've read about it, the signing, and I've read about his background, but I'll be perfectly honest, I haven't seen him play. But it's look, let's see. It could be a great move. It'll be a great move for him regardless, but is he going to be good enough to push through? That's the question, and look, who's going to be coaching him is another question. I think that will be important, but it's definitely a player that we can look forward to following his progress and see. It would be a great story if he comes through and becomes a frontliner.
Yeah,
looks good in the highlights videos, Gav, doesn't he? He's obviously tall. He's played back row and second row, it sounds like, and he has a bang of Dan Sheehan off his kind of stature and the way he carries the ball. So obviously everyone looks really good in their highlights videos. The fact that he has a few of them on YouTube would suggest he's again been pushing for this opportunity, has been proactive probably in seeking further opportunity. It hasn't come in England or with Bath or whatever in Exeter, but some nice tries in his highlights reels, and worth a punt, I suppose, for Munster, a guy who's clearly very athletic in a position where they have been looking for depth, and Declan Moore went off to Ulster and Scott Buckley's coming through. So seems like a bit of a project, but one that will be fascinating to see how it works out.
Yeah, played back row for Beach and Cliff. I think he was player of the year in his senior year. Then that same year he's playing for Bath under 18s, but as a lock. And he's playing in the same team as Orlando Bailey and some of the Bath guys now. There's actually, like, looking through that Bath team, it was interesting, kind of a who's who of Bath players, but also forgot that Oran McNulty was there on that same team as Moore and Bailey and Tom de Glanville and a few of these guys. It's pretty cool. On that coaching front then, Birch, you had some insights yourself, Murray, in your newsletter to members last night on the Munster side of things. I mean, are we any closer to kind of knowing who is going to take the reins? And can you maybe tell non-members or give them a peek behind the curtain as to what you were saying last night?
Yeah, so it's really interesting in Irish rugby. There's a couple up in the air. Felipe Contepomi is, as far as we know, strongly in contention for the Argentina gig as well. So there's a few assistant coach roles there. Ulster D coach with Jared Payne leaving, and then Munster to confirm and clarify their coaching setup. It sounds like David Nucifora, the RFU's performance director, is really hands-on with this one, and obviously the head coaching roles are always RFU appointments, but sounds like he's really got to grips with him and wants Munster to really nail this coaching ticket. Graham Rowntree, as far as I understand, is the favourite to be the next head coach and is kind of lined up for that role. He signed a new 2-year deal and very popular with the players. Obviously hasn't done that role before, and in that sense they would probably look to have someone who has maybe an overview on attack and philosophy. Jordan Murphy was a name I heard mentioned this week, which was really interesting. He's been out of the limelight since leaving Leicester in 2020, wasn't it? And the other name that keeps coming up is Milton Haig, the former Georgia head coach, who's now the head coach over in Tokyo, Suntory Sun Goliath over in Japan. And there's been talk about maybe a kind of off-pitch role. And you flagged this, Birch. Munster having someone who's in charge of contracting, succession planning, allowing the head coach to focus on actual on-pitch matters. And Haig is someone who's come up in that regard. He's obviously worked with Rowntree in Georgia. He did that role for 8 years as head coach there. And Rowntree came on board for the 2019 World Cup. So that's the chat at the moment. Noel McNamara is another name who keeps being linked to Munster. He's over in the Sharks as attack coach now, but he's clearly really highly regarded. And indeed, if he was still in Leinster, he'd probably be next in line probably for the backs coach role. So waiting to hear it all confirmed, but there's lots going on in the background as new Sephora kind of drives it on now.
Any scoops for us, Birch? If I was Noel McNamara, like, I'd be definitely eyeing that backs coach role if indeed it becomes vacant.
In Leinster.
Sorry,
yeah. So look, I think someone like Noel McNamara or Mike Prendergast now, you know, there's potentially 2 shows in town, 2 options for them. Yeah, the Milton Hague one is definitely, it's been doing the rounds for ages. There's actually been no one else really strongly linked to that DOR role, and again, it's the nature of looking for a DOR a year out from a World Cup. You know, there's and 4 months or 5 months from June. You know, and I think they actually probably got started a little bit later than they should have. You know, when Johan told them he was gone, you know, that was probably the time to strike. Whereas now it's March. For some reason, it didn't seem to be anyone really acting on it urgently. So obviously, if Milton Hague comes in as DOR, is he going to be doing the recruitment? Apart from Japan, where generally there's a rugby manager doing the recruitment. In Georgia, he wouldn't have been doing recruitment or contracting, so it doesn't really seem like a good fit for what they probably need. The only positive I would say is if Graham is going to be the head coach, they have a relationship, and that is important. And then obviously you would hope that Graham could put together his own coaching group, so like to give him every chance of being successful. So yeah, the link that Graham had being part of the Georgian coaching staff at a World Cup under Milton, I think could be invaluable there. But look, there's not, Rod said it, Scott Robertson's not going to come at the moment. There's not many high profile coaches or DORs that are on the market.
The other thing we discussed is before Munster kind of tasked with cutting their budget a little bit and tightening things up. So that again makes it that little bit more difficult. You're not really going to be able to go out and grab someone out of a contract. As Birch mentions, everyone's kind of tied up. So it's a kind of tricky period for Munster figuring out what comes next. And as Birch said, with Chris Moore, it'll be interesting for the players as well to find out who exactly they're going to be working with.
Yeah, and I think just to flag as well, I think Leinster have to cut their budget as well. And I think you'll see 5 or 6 kind of, steady players departing, and that all won't be down to lack of game time. Some will be down to budgetary restrictions. So, but from an IRFU point of view, it's a case of making sure we have enough resource to keep the Porters, the Carberries, the Bundy Keys, the Ian Hendersons in Ireland, and if there has to be a little bit of fallout a little bit further down, well, that's where it'll happen rather than lose a high profile player.
Just quickly, Leinster at home to the Lions. That's tomorrow night, 25-8. Birch should get the job done there, really, as is always the case.
No, they will, but they definitely will. And the Lions, in fairness, are rebuilding. Do a really good thing, and not to talk about to avoid Leinster Lions, because I think it'll be a bonus point for Leinster. But I think it's really promising to see the recruitment that's happening in South African rugby. I mean, my understanding is that the Sharks have signed Lud, Diager and Estebet, which would be pretty cool if they come to. Salary cap over there might be getting pushed a little bit, but that's not for. I don't care about salary cap. I just want to see those South African teams being in the URC loaded with quality players, and I think that's something to really look forward to next year. We've had a kind of a stagnated start to this because of COVID, etc. But I think next year, looking at what the Bulls can bring, and obviously having adapted to the style of rugby here as well, the Stormers, Stormers have some real talent. The Lions are young, and they need to probably booster themselves, their squad a little bit. But I think they're doing that. So yeah, I think that's a real positive for the URC.
Murray Stormers heading to Galway the following day, Saturday. And we've been here before with Connacht. Drive it on now. Just drive, win again. Build upon what was a really good win last weekend. And I hate the word consistency, but let's just establish it, right?
Definitely. Kind of gleefully looking forward to pissing rain, as they've mentioned this week, because Stormers are coming from the summer. I think it was 27 degrees over there yesterday in Cape Town. It will be very different this weekend for them. Nice to see, as Bernard says, the strengthening of the South African side. Stephen Kitsoff is over as their captain this weekend. Herschel Yankees is involved, and obviously the Stormers aren't what they were, but it is nice to see those Springboks now filtering in. And having had that disaster and the really tough time with teams getting stuck over there, including Munster, before Christmas, it's nice to see this element of the competition coming back in. I've been watching these South African derbies over the last few weeks, and it really has been exciting to see some of the quality of rugby and some of the players involved, the likes of Lukanyuam, etc., and Mapimpi, and all the stars who are back now playing club rugby. As we've hoped and anticipated, it's going to add hugely to the URC. So, yeah, Connacht got to back up what they did last weekend, but it'll be good to see the increased competition from the South African sides.
A reminder to everybody before this podcast shifts to a members-only slot on a Monday, you can still get 33% off an annual membership to the 42. It's members.the42.ie. Use your promo code the42RW. It's all caps, all one word. We have a couple of painters in the house. I told them I'd be finished at 2 o'clock. It's 8 minutes past 2 and they're actually stomping around upstairs. So I'll have to call it a day. Great to see you as always, gents. Birch, thank you.
Thanks, guys. See you next week.
Thank you, Murray.
Thanks, Gavin. Thanks to everyone who's signed up so far. Hopefully a few more. Appreciate it.
Definitely.
100%. Thanks to everybody at home. Thank you to everybody who has made that move with us, not only in the last week or so since we've announced this, but over the last couple of years while the membership has been going on. We can't tell you enough how much we appreciate your support, and we're looking forward to kind of driving this on now over the next number of years with you. We will be back on Monday. It'll still be a regular slot, the regular slot for Murray and Owen, and then back here again on Thursday for the final time, I think. I don't know. I need to look at the schedule, but we'll chat to you then anyway. Mind yourselves in the meantime. Enjoy all the rugby over the weekend. Take it easy.